Restaurant. And I'm not surprised, gotta come with accent and stuff. Before I know that we are interested.
Good morning. I think I've been asked to step in the chair. I arrived 4 a.m. today, so I'm still in my sleeping mode, but it's okay. So I think on this, in this room we have Abadele and he's ready. We have Emmanuel Adolfo. Okay, good. And then Dr. Marco is here, and then Helga.
I don't think she's speaking, but
okay.
That's it.
Okay, then once we have Abadele is presenting on Akan and Yoruba construction verbs as idioms. So, Abadele, say, what is the time? 20 minutes.
Presentation
10 minutes. Okay.
Traditional broadcast.
So let's go. Okay. 8:50 by my watch.
So, we'll go ahead and get started. So, the title in the book of abstract is actually incorrect. What was sent on the abstract was Akan and Yoruba serial verb construction nominals as idioms. So, we're looking at how serial verbs are made, serial verb constructions are made into nouns. So, basically, we're looking at this quote and this phenomenon that fully lexicalized, these serial verb constructions are fully lexicalized into verb compounds, and they are used as lexicalized idioms. So we're going to interrogate exactly what that means in terms of lexicalized idioms. So the major research question that we're looking at is how compositionality and decompositionality, will explain what those are, what they tell us about semantic integration, lexicalization, and overall idiomaticity. So when we're talking about compositionality, we're talking about the degree to which individual or combined verbal elements of SVCs retain or lose their meaning when they are nominalized. And when it comes to decompositionality, we're talking about the ability of, or degree to which these serial verb construction nominals can be broken down into their component parts. At a certain time, when you have them as a nominal, when people try to get back to what verbs they came from, they have a bit of a hard time in terms of semantics and others. So semantic integration, basically the point of this slide is that semantic integration is in the mind and lexicalization is in the language. And we'll go into that. Now this morning I was given 2 tasks. One was to try to put an elephant into a tiny car, and the other one was to put this whole presentation into 20 minutes. So I chose the harder of the 2 because I don't know how I'll get everything into 20 minutes, but I'll try. So lexicalization can be understood as a process of adding words, set phrases, and or word patterns to a language. So in this case, we're talking about how these serial verb constructions come to behave like and be understood as one prior to in the SVC and after nominalization, and how this adds lexical items to the language, idioms to the language in this instance. So when we're talking about full lexicalized, these are the main ones that we're talking about have this idiomatic meaning, where the sum total is different from the individual parts. And in this, we're dealing with a continuum. So again, the meaning of the individual parts that originally made up the lexeme, that meaning is no longer clear due to what is called semantic bleaching, right? And then also the lexicalized word becomes institutionalized over a length of time. And at certain points in time, you can find where the individual parts come into disuse. You can find this especially in Yoruba. Now, the main crux of what we're talking about is this idiomatic nature. So the definition of idioms, we're looking at 2. One is that idioms are linguistic expressions whose overall meaning cannot be predicted from the meanings of the constituent parts. And this is what we're dealing with here. And we'll give examples. And according to SIL, an idiom is a multi-word construction that is a semantic unit whose meaning cannot be deduced from the meanings of its constituents and has a non-productive syntactic structure. Well, you find that these definitions focus mainly on compositionality. How compositional is this? However, in a study by Barkima 96, we're looking at compositionality, but not only that, where in the case of compositionality, you have where the sum of meaning is greater than the individual parts. That's what most definitions of idioms focus on. But there are other features of idioms. One is low flexibility, where elements tend not to be manipulated morphosyntactically, where you won't say it's raining cats and dogs and at the same time say it's raining cat and dog. If you do that, someone will say, oh, you don't know the language. You understand? Say, kick the bucket, you say, oh, they kicked the pail. You know, you've done something different, so it tends to be inflexible, high collocability. That last example is more an example of that, where these types resist replacement of collocational elements, either with synonyms or antonyms, that it loses something in that. Also, high familiarity. These tend to have institutionalized sociocultural meaning within the linguistic milieu. So the main ones that we're looking at as idioms are the full lexicalized integrated serial verb constructions. I'll give examples of what those are in case that term is not quite familiar. There are other types along the continuum, but those are not as idiomatic as we're talking about. Oftentimes there's a direct semantic mapping. And we're looking at Akan data and Yoruba data. So again, this is a cross-linguistic type of study. And in this we found in phase 1 we had 75 participants, and the majority fell in this range of ages 21 through 40. For phase 2, we were looking at primarily non-literate speakers, older speakers, and most of them were over the age of 60. And this is just a quick bar graph that shows this. So this is phase 1. The bulk, over 60 participants, fell in this main range. But we decided to go back to the field and find out what non-literate speakers. And for the phase 2, the majority of them were over the age of 60. And the representative of varieties of the Akan language, we had Chi, we had Fanti, we had Ekwapim. This is phase 1. Phase 2, Asante Chi, Fanti, Ekwapim Chi is how they self-identified as speakers. So again, when we're saying Akan, we're not saying let's only look at Asante and pretend like we're talking about all of Akan. We're trying to get some degree of representation through the major literary dialects. For Yoruba, we try to do the same thing. We have quite a few questionnaires, but we're just getting some back. I just got mailed some 3 days ago, so we're not fully processed. But we have 36 that are in the data that we have here. And this has been sufficient to start seeing the pattern. And we have about 50 to go. Not all 50 will be usable. Some are not complete and other issues. Data was captured primarily at Ibadan, and we were looking for Oyo Yoruba, one of the major varieties of Yoruba, Ife, for Ife Yoruba and Eko, for Lagos Yoruba, while standard Yoruba is spoken throughout. And here, this is the main chunk that we had in terms of respondents so far. And then we had speakers of Oyo, of standard Yoruba, of Eko, and then we also had Ife and Ondo represented. So let's go straight to the examples. Fansunoto and Samuno, which is compare the water to the liquor. Now when this is made into a noun, this comes out as Mfatoho, comparison, and example. So you would think that it would just be fa, take, and then to, throw, or put, depending on who gives you the gloss. But what we have here is not coming directly from, is not throw, put, right? You would think that that's what it would be, but it has idiomatic meaning. Now, as a matter of fact, nominalization came to be a test in order to see what's going on in terms of idiomaticity. So 90.3% of respondents were able to produce the form Mfatoho when they're given all elements of it. So the idiom is a whole chunk, right? You can't withhold parts of the idiom and expect people to be able to do linguistic tasks with it, and this is exactly what we found. So when you give them fa, to, and hon, not only the serial verbs. This is why I started saying serial verb construction nominalization instead of just serial verb nominalization. If you just give them the serial verb parts, fa and to, they'd have no idea what to do, and this is what we found. So only 7.4 were able to come up with Mfatohum when they were only given fa and to without the relation now hum. And we have a depiction of this. So when we give them all three fa, to, hon, just about everybody knows exactly what that is. But when you give them just fa and to, they're not privileging, as linguists, sometimes we say serial verb, serial verb, serial verb, but they're not privileging just the serial verb part. They're saying all parts of the idiom are necessary. So most said they're not sure of any type of noun that can be made with fa and to. So they're not able to get back to if fa to hon is the same thing as parts of that. Most said that there is no noun, there's none. Some said in fa to, we had 3 speakers who were able to come back, and that was again the exception rather than the rule. In most cases, 0 were able to come up with these when we tried this type of test. Now, so that's how they compose it. Now looking at decompositionality. In decomposition, when we gave them the SVC and form and fa to hon, 83.1% gave as what elements, what are the verbs that this came from. We were specifically asking for the verbs. They never said, well, we're only going to give you the verbs. They're saying we're going to give you all parts of the idiom that are relevant. So they gave us fa, to, and hon, and they included this hon, which some call a postposition, others call a related noun, as part of this SVC complex. In contrast, only 6.2 gave only the verbal elements, right? So we're saying that this is linguistically significant. So again, when we ask them to decompose it, they're giving us fa, to, and hon. And then also when we're asking them, okay, well now give us a breakdown. What does fa mean? What does to mean? What does hon mean? Most are giving us the composite meaning. 44.7% give us the composite meaning of compare or example. So they're not thinking about it anymore in terms of this means take, this means put or throw. And again, you have some who are saying, all right, well, fa just means take, but again, most are saying compare, exemplify, and things of this nature. In Kambon, we found a similar thing. Akan and Yoruba, we have united. In Kambon is how it comes together as a noun. And again, 95%, well over 95% are produced in Kambon when they were given all 3. But this was not the case if they're just giving kan and bo, right? 100% of the phase 2 respondents, they're able to come up with in Kambon. We also looked at decomposing them. So 95%, they decompose it to ka, bo, and mu, or kabum. And they're not going to give you just ka and bo and say, well, don't worry about the mu, it's not a verb, right? So this has implications for what we're talking about. 0 gave ka and bo alone. So this includes the notion of collocability, right? These have been fused, they've been lexicalized, they're semantically integrated in the mind. So this is what they're coming up with. Because of time, I think we're going to have to skip fast. But again, we're asking them, well, what's ka alone mean? What does ka mean? They're not telling you touch, they're not telling you whatever. Most are giving you the composite meaning, add up, gather, unite, all these types of idioms that come from all 3 put together. Very few, like one gave us, oh, it means touch, or kan, they're thinking about kan, it means taste, and things of this nature. We found the same thing in tatoso, right? So most gave chato and so, right? And this is what we find here. Very few gave just cha and to, and this is linguistically significant, we argue. Again, in decomposition, they give us all 3, cha, to, and so. And then in terms of meaning, this one they say cut, but most are, or a good percentage are saying falsely accused, blackmail, things that are coming from this. This is linguistically significant. Motoho is the same thing, procrastination. In terms of composition and decomposition, this is a pattern that we find time and again. And for here, we'll look at Yoruba data. I think we're running low on time. But we found a similar pattern developing for Yoruba data, that the related nouns and or other arguments were included in the decomposed form and the composite meanings were given. Let's give an example. Fi, ori, ji. So take head and give it as a gift. That's to forgive. Instead of cutting your head off, I'll give you your head as a gift. I'm forgiving you. Right? So iforiji is forgiveness. So when we ask them to decompose it, they are not only looking at fi and ji, say, well, those are the verbs, right? They're including ori, which is head. It's not locative, it's not a postposition. This is a real argument, and they're saying that this is part of the whole. When we're asking them the meaning, None of them are saying fee, it means take, and G is give as a gift. They're all giving for give or pardon. Those who aren't giving that, I'm not sure, but 0 are giving us these individual non-idiomatic meanings. Don, wo. So don is to shine, wo is to look. So I shine it, I look, that's my test, right? So the composite meaning is test, right? And again, when they're composing, all of them, when you give them don and wo, they're able to come up with idamo or adamo. And when they're giving the meanings, they're giving the composite meanings. They're not only giving shine, they're not giving look. This is significant, this means something. Same thing, ideruba, which is da iruba, to cause fear, to make contact with a person, to scare someone. Again, when they're composing it, they're composing ideruba. And then they're given the composite meaning fear, scare, to be frightened. None of them are saying cause, make contact. And then when we're asking them to decompose it to the composite parts, they're giving deru, which is cause, very good, cause fear, and then make contact. They're putting the fear as part of it. They're not privileging the verbs over anything else that's a part of this construction. The idiom, the idiomatic whole is what's important here. And again, when we ask them, okay, well, what's just the da part mean? They're saying it means scare, right? They're looking at the whole meaning as opposed to the individual. Ibaba, this is similar to jidye, right? So believe, ba is to receive, ba is to hear. So again, they're giving the entire meaning. So ibaba, they're able to compose that together. And then we ask them the verbs that comes from ba, and then ba. Now we ask them about the meaning, believe, right? We have one person that says take and hear. That's literal, right? So this is an exception to the rule. What's this person doing? They must be a linguist. And they're breaking it down, ba, or da, yoruba. We found the same thing, ifarabale, to take the body and make contact with the earth. That's to be patient, right? As opposed to running giddy all around. So they're coming up, they include the ara, which is body, as part of it. They're not privileging the verbs. And then here again, we're asking them, well, what's the meaning? Be patient, patience, peaceful, calm, careful. All these in the same semantic family. And then finally, ifahimti, to take the back and then push something. That's to retire, right? You can see some of the worldview in here. So again, they're coming with fahimti. They're including the ehin, the back, right? This is on a different level than just a relator noun or something that you can say as a postposition or whatever. When they're given the meaning retire, we have only one person who gave literal, to take your back and push it on something, right? And then ikpamog, the exact same thing. So let's come to our conclusion. I think we've made the point with copious examples and because of our time. But we found the same thing, that they're given the composite. Also in terms of the verbal and non-verbal elements, here if we just give them fi and ba, we're looking for ifarabale. They're not able to produce ifarabale when you just give them the verbs. We're looking for da and ji, idariji, which is another variation on forgiveness. They're not able to compose idariji when you just give them that. And then ti, that was the last example, ifainti, retirement, that they're not able to come up with this. So again, when we just give them fi ba, looking for ifarabale, they give you this, but then they say, all right, let's say this can't exist hypothetically. We're not sure what that would mean, right? So even if they can compose it in terms of a structure, they're like, all right, this could be a word hypothetically, but it's a meaningless word. They call it idaji, they can compose that, but then when you ask them, well, what would that mean? Not sure. Half, which is a whole nother word that sounds similar, or early in the morning, that's idaji, different tones there, trying to come up with something. Very few said forgiveness, ifiti. We were looking for ifeinti, but they're not able to produce ifeinti when you just give them those elements, right? They're not sure. So we have here parallel clients. The more semantically integrated these are, the more lexicalized they are, and the more idiomatic they are. These are just different perspectives of basically saying something similar. In conclusion, we found that there's an inseparability due to semantic integration, lexicalization, and idiomaticity between verbal elements as well as non-verbal elements. This is a core aspect of what we're talking about. that the lexicalization of all elements provides a roadmap to and from nominalization. That means I need all the parts in order to either go towards the nominalization or to be able to come away from it. Also, the word construction in the term serial verb construction makes a provision to account for the importance of nonverbal elements. However, when you look for definitions of what is a serial verb construction, they say these are two verbs that are doing such and such and such and such, which may or may not have argumentation. As linguists, we're focused on the verbs, but speakers are not focusing on the verbs, they're focusing on the whole. So the nonverbal elements are important in their own right. Akan and Yoruba, SVC, and other arguments. And again, I started saying serial verb construction nominalization instead of just serial verb nominalization, because if the speakers are not privileging just the verbs, why would our terminology do that? So other arguments are regularly included in the task of decomposing. The composite idiomatic meanings of the SVC are given rather than the meanings of the individual elements. Lexicalization can occur to the point that there can be semantic opacity with regard to the semantics of the individual elements, as we saw. And then when nonverbal elements are withheld in the nominalization test, speakers are typically not able to supply these themselves. And in conclusion, lexicalization may lead to issues in the semantic analysis, the composition and decomposition of serial verb constructions and serial verb construction nominals. This is expected to hold across West African languages which share the aerial feature of SVC and SVCN, and perhaps to other areas that also have these serial verb constructions and nominals. So finally, Mesdames, Messieurs, Eshi, thank you.
All right, thank you. We have Dr. Badele's presentation. Now I will open it up for 10 minutes comment, observation, questions. Yes.
Yeah. You know, when you talk about composition and decomposition, always interesting, yes, as you did, right? But I was wondering, how does this tell us about conceptualization of the language?
Right.
I mean, both languages.
Right. So in short, we're looking at how idioms work in the language. What it tells you is that these things are thought about as composite wholes, right? This is one of the main takeaways I want people to leave here and say, all right, when we're looking at this, we're not only looking at this verb and that verb, and then here's something that's irrelevant, or here's this verb, there's, when you look at the definitions of serial verb constructions, they're only talking about what the verbs are doing generally. But when we're looking at composition and decomposition, speakers of both languages are not focusing only on this verb and whether or not they're parallel or whether or not this one is embedded. Like all of these things that we define as linguists. So what we are looking at as linguists is we're trying to capture what native speakers know about their language. So if our definitions aren't capturing this reality that we're finding time and time again across different languages and across different examples, perhaps we need to tweak our definition of serial verb constructions as a whole.
So like the examples you give with that kind of example, the move and hook.
Yeah.
How would you describe them in this whole, try description to,
Right.
So definitely, technically, they are not part of the verbs. But we have called them one way, they are adverbs and all kinds of things. But in this particular case, how would you describe it?
Well, this is, in the 70s we had serial verb constructions as adverbs, we had serial verb constructions as verbs, we had all this going back and forth. We're looking at serial verb constructions as idioms, right? So in this case, we're looking at this as part of the idiom, as part of the serial verb construction as a whole.
In terms of decomposition.
Right, so in terms of decomposition, there was a paper that came out that started looking at them as relator nouns that talk about how they relate. It's saying this, on, this, under. It's giving you the relation in terms of spatial reality of all of those. So we found that in the Akan. What was surprising is that also we found a similar type of composition and decomposition for the Yoruba, where it's not relator nouns at all, postpositions, whatever you want to call them. These are clear lexical items. Ori head, that's a noun. Ehim back, that's a noun, right? So it's even less ambiguous, and it points us to say these are important in their own right. We can't keep privileging just the verbs because we want to, for the purpose of a theory of argument sharing or whatever we want to do.
Can I look at the title of the title of the
It may be easier to close the slideshow. And also in the abstract book, the title that you have there is not correct. Right. So Akan and Yoruba, serial verb construction, nominals as idioms.
Okay. And we go down a little bit to the point that this is why I have lexicalization.
Okay.
I like this.
Okay.
Yeah.
It likes you too.
If you are going to make this the title, you know, because I see this as a case of you are doing lexicalization, but it's from phrases. Right? So it's kind of very interesting how the phrases are lexicalized. And
Yeah.
you can look at the mechanisms involved,
Yeah.
what is going on and all those kinds
Yeah.
of things.
Yeah.
So maybe if you want to get this published, you can get rid of all the diagrams. That is fine because you want people's opinion on this kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, but usually people as linguists, people want to know the mechanism, the strategies that are involved in making a phrase to become a lexical item.
Yeah.
And also we want to know semantically the direction in which all these phrases are becoming. If they become a lexical item, what kind of the kind of meaning fields we are trying to come up with these items.
Yeah.
How do you see that?
Yeah, so lexicalization is the method by which this is occurring.
Yeah.
And in my thesis, this is something that I worked on for my thesis, that you have these clause chaining, and in this you can almost add in and this and this and this. And then above that you have these partial lexicalized where they still retain their individual meaning, right? Here we have even more lexicalized. And in Yoruba, there's even a further stage where it's so lexicalized that people don't even know what the individual meanings of the verbs are. It's not that far in Akan to this point.
So you are saying that Yoruba can become fossilized?
Yes.
Yeah, so we cannot
Not for fossilized one, and then not only fossilized, but it's also to the point where it's not being used in any other context from here. So it's a fossil in the true sense of like an archaeological fossil that we don't even know where it came from anymore. This is something that Bambushe also reported back in the 70s, problems of decomposition, and he was looking at verb nominal collocations, but we find the same thing in these. If you have something like bagbe, it's to forget, right? We know that ba is to receive or to take something, but the be is like, what is that? There's a word be, which is to carry. But how would you get from that? There may have been some type of other way that existed that had some type of forgetfulness, and people would have to come up with folk etymologies to try to, deal with this type of thing.
Very erasure, I don't know if I'm using the right term, of the basic ones.
Yeah.
It's really very interesting.
Yes.
The question is what happened to the society?
Yeah.
How they no longer use
Yeah. Well, this is something that you find in idioms, and idioms oftentimes they tend to have syntax, they tend to have words to and fro. Like that's not, fro isn't even really English or Scottish, right? You say by and large. Like everyone knows what you mean when you say by and large, but now if you try to chop that up, by and large, what in the world does that mean? Right? So these are idioms that mean something, and like when you say something like raining cats and dogs, they say in Paris that when it would rain, all of the cats and dogs that were in the sewer system would come out. And it was metaphorically like, oh, look at how all of them came from the rain, right? So, but that's a very specific context. Very few people know that specific history in order to be able to get back to where it was. We just use the language. So I think this is the relevance of presenting these as idioms because there are so many features. We really focus on compositionality here, but lack of flexibility, this high collocability, the institutionalization, all of these things are letting us know there's something idiomatic going on here that lets us know we need to deal with it as a chunk, as a whole, instead of trying to dichotomize all of these things.
Yeah, so some processes of maybe lexicalization
Yes.
in Akan and Yoruba.
Yes.
Can give you a bit out of this.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate that.
But this just, I know perhaps you did not think around that, but I was thinking how would this informs language acquisition?
How would it inform language acquisition?
Yeah, maybe second language acquisition.
Yeah, this
Especially you being
a second language acquirer.
of a camper.
Yeah, this is just in terms of the teaching of the language, the idioms are part of it. I remember back in the 80s, they had a sitcom about a guy who came from Greece to move to Chicago, and part of the running joke is that he got all the idioms wrong. So instead of by and large, he would say by and huge. Instead of raining cats and dogs, he would say raining cats and mice. And like it was, the mark of the comedy of it was he doesn't know the idioms, he's not familiar with the idioms. So I think that part of it would be to introduce these, as these are some of the set phrases. You know, this is how you can deal with some of them. For sometimes you can find that there is a degree of reduplication, but usually with idioms, you find that even the reduplication would change the entire meaning. It would force, you know, a literal reading, where you can say kick the bucket, but if I say kick the pail, that's gonna force a literal reading, or kick the buckets, it will force a literal, you know, reading of it. So you have these things that are going on in parallel. You have the literal reading that stays in the language, like G, D, it can literally just be G, D. But in this context, it's now idiomatic. So just in terms of teaching the language, for them to be learning the language, they would have to be given this type of information.
All right. I'll take the last one and then
I was also thinking, how will ICVs also fall in this context?
Very good. So when you're looking at ICVs, you're looking at the same type of thing from a more syntactic, you know, type of perspective. I think to a large degree, this is a question of the perspective from which you are choosing to approach this issue. So if you're looking at ICVs, it's very, there's a brother, Samson Kosa, who really works a lot on ICVs. I was just reading a paper of his. What I found is that looking at it from that perspective may not necessarily help identify the reasons why, or to explain this phenomenon in terms of, well, why can't you deal with this? Why can't you decompose it back? What's going on with the meaning? Because it's more focused on what's going on in the syntax, that this one has to come, and in other cases it doesn't come. So, you know, for myself, I prefer this type of lexicalization approach, the idiomaticity type of approach, because of the explanatory power. Basically, you have two different things. You have evaluative criteria and organizing principles. The ICV helps you to organize, you know, what's going on in the language. This is going into this slot, this is going into this slot, this is what's going on there. But in terms of why are speakers evaluating it in this way, I think you lose a certain degree of explanatory power in terms of how come they must include this one, how come they cannot remove this in this type of task.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Obadele, for the presentation and the so we now call on